Rancher buys cabin for 12 cents, then finds giant Apache girl hanged inside. The sun was just beginning to rise over the wide, dusty plains, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. The rancher, a man named Tom Harris, had been up before dawn. As usual, Tom wasn't the type of man to sleep in late. His days were filled with tending to his herd, fixing fences, and walking the long stretches of land he had inherited from his father. Life on the ranch was hard, but Tom had always found comfort in the routine. He loved the quiet, the way the wind rustled through the tall grasses, and the smell of the earth after a fresh morning rain. Yet, even with all his work, Tom always had a restless streak, a curiosity that made him look for things beyond the boundaries of his own land. It was during one of these restless mornings that Tom heard about a cabin being sold in the nearby town of Dry Creek. He didn't usually buy properties without seeing them, but this one caught his attention for a very unusual reason. The cabin was listed for 12 cents. Yes, not $12, but 12 cents. Tom chuckled when he first read the listing. Someone must have made a mistake, he said to himself. But the idea stayed with him. A cabin that cheap could mean only one of two things. It was a scam, or it had a story behind it. And Tom had always loved stories. He decided to take a drive to Dry Creek to see the cabin for himself. The journey took him past rolling hills, through patches of wild flowers, and along dirt roads that were narrow and lined with tall, ancient trees. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine and earth brace. Tom had driven these roads many times before, but today the scenery felt different, almost as if it was leading him somewhere important. When he arrived at the property, the sight of the cabin took his breath away. It was small and clearly had not been maintained for decades. The wooden planks of the walls were weathered and gray, and the roof sagged slightly in the middle. Vines crept up the sides of the cabin, wrapping around the windows like nature's own hands. A single chimney rose crookedly from the roof, hinting at the warmth it might have once held. The front door was partially open, creaking slightly in the wind, as if inviting Tom to step inside. Neighbors who lived nearby came out to watch him inspect the property. They were wary of the old cabin and whispered among themselves about strange noises, shadows, and the feeling that the place was haunted. Tom smiled politely, but did not let their warnings affect him. He had never been one to believe in ghost stories. For him, the cabin was a puzzle, a mystery waiting to be solved. Tom approached the cabin slowly. Each step on the uneven ground made the wooden boards beneath the porch groan. He reached out and pushed the door open fully, peering inside. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by the morning light streaming through broken window panes. Old furniture lay scattered around, some pieces broken, others just worn by time. The air smelled of damp wood and something older, something almost like forgotten memories. But Tom felt a shiver run down his spine, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. He had a feeling that this place had a story to tell, and he was determined to uncover it. He stepped inside, careful not to trip over loose floorboards. The cabin was small, with only a single room that served as both living area and kitchen. A staircase led to what must have been a loft, though the steps looked fragile. Tom's eyes roamed over every detail. A rusted kettle on the stove, a cracked mirror hanging crookedly on the wall, and an old trunk in the corner that seemed to have been untouched for years. There was a silence in the cabin that was almost tangible, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. As he walked further in, Tom noticed something strange. The floorboards in one corner of the cabin were darker, almost blackened, and there was a faint outline on the wall, like a shadow that had been left behind. He bent down to inspect it and realized that it wasn't dirt or mold. It was something older, something that had been there for a very long time. Tom's curiosity deepened. He could feel that he was on the edge of discovering something significant, something that had been hidden away from the world. For a moment, Tom thought about leaving. After all, who knew what he might find in a place like this? But then he reminded himself that he had always been drawn to mysteries. This cabin, cheap as it was, represented more than just a bargain. It was a link to the past, a piece of history waiting to be uncovered. He walked over to the old trunk and tried to open it. The lock had long since rusted away, and with a little effort, the lid creaked open. Inside were old clothes, a few scattered books, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Tom picked up the letters carefully, feeling the fragile paper in his hands. The writing was faded, but he could make out bits of it. Names, dates, and snippets of stories that hinted at lives lived long ago. Hours passed as Tom explored the cabin, his excitement growing with every new discovery. He found a small diary under a loose floorboard, its pages yellowed and brittle. He read about someone's daily life, their joys and sorrows, the challenges they faced in a world very different from his own. Tom felt a strange connection to the person who had written it, as if their experiences had somehow reached across time to touch him. The cabin was no longer just a cheap property. It was a vessel of memories, of history, and of untold stories. As evening approached, Tom finally stepped outside, taking a moment to look back at the cabin. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. He could feel the weight of the day, but also a sense of purpose. He had discovered something extraordinary, something that went beyond the value of money. The 12 cents he had spent seemed almost meaningless compared to the richness of what he had found. That night, as he lay in his small house back on the ranch, Tom couldn't stop thinking about the cabin. Questions raced through his mind. Who had lived there? Why had the place been abandoned? What stories had been left behind? He knew he had to return, to continue exploring and learning everything he could about the people who had once called that cabin home. There was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something unexpected was waiting for him, something that would change everything. Little did Tom know the cabin held a secret far more shocking than he could ever imagine. It was a secret that would confront him with the fragility of life, the mysteries of history, and a story that had been left untold for decades. But for now he only felt the thrill of discovery, the quiet satisfaction of having stumbled upon something extraordinary in the middle of nowhere. The journey had just begun, and Tom was ready for whatever lay ahead. The next morning, Tom woke up with a mix of excitement and unease. The memory of the cabin lingered in his mind, the quiet mystery of its old walls calling him back. He knew he had to return. There were still things to explore, corners he hadn't checked, and stories left untold. He prepared himself for the day, making sure he had a flashlight, gloves, and a notebook to record anything interesting. The sun was just rising again as he set out on his truck, the engine rumbling softly against the silence of the morning plains. When Tom arrived at the cabin, the air felt different. There was a stillness that hadn't been there before, a kind of weight that pressed down on him. He paused at the edge of the porch, taking in the scene. The vines had shifted overnight with the wind, casting moving shadows across the weathered walls. The door, slightly ajar from yesterday, seemed to welcome him back. He stepped forward cautiously, feeling the creak of the old wooden boards under his boots. Each sound seemed louder than normal, echoing in the empty morning air. Breath. Inside, the cabin looked much the same at first glance. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, furniture remained broken and worn, and the faint smell of old wood filled the air. But as Tom's eyes adjusted, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. Narration. In the far corner, there was a figure. A tall girl, her frame unusually large, and she seemed suspended in the air. Tom froze, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. The first instinct was fear. The second was disbelief. Great. He blinked, stepped closer, and realized it was real. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The cabin, with its quiet shadows and broken furniture, suddenly felt like a living thing, holding its breath along with him. Tom's mind raced. How could this happen here, in a place that had been abandoned for years? Who was she? Why had no one found her before? He swallowed hard, fighting a wave of panic, and reminded himself to stay calm. The practical part of him, the rancher who had faced harsh storms and wild animals, kicked in. He needed to be careful to assess the situation without acting recklessly. He approached slowly, every step measured. The floorboards groaned under his weight, and the air seemed colder near the corner. As he got closer, he could see her face, pale but calm, with features that hinted at both strength and sorrow. Her clothing was old-fashioned, made of rough cloth, simple but sturdy, suggesting she had come from a humble background. Tom felt an unexpected pang of sadness. It was as if the cabin itself had been holding on to her memory, keeping her story locked away for decades. Tom crouched down to check for any signs of life, although a part of him already feared the answer. He carefully looked for movement, listened for breathing, and even called her name softly, hoping for a miracle. But there was nothing. She had been gone for some time. A deep, hollow feeling settled in his chest. He had expected mysteries, oddities, even ghosts in a figurative sense. But this was real. This was life and death, intertwined in a way that he could hardly process. The rancher backed away slightly, his mind racing. He knew he had to call someone immediately, but the thought of leaving her there, alone and forgotten, was unbearable. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. Breaths, each second felt heavier, the quiet of the cabin pressing down on him like a living weight. Finally, he managed to dial the local authorities, explaining the situation in a voice that was calm but firm. He gave directions, described the property, and waited, pacing the room with a nervous energy that wouldn't let him stay still.
While waiting, Tom began to notice details about the cabin he hadn't seen before.
On the wall near the corner where the girl had been, faint markings were visible. Scratches or perhaps carvings made long ago. There were old photographs on a small table, yellowed and curling at the edges, showing families and landscapes of the past. There were pieces of broken jewelry scattered across the floor, tiny reminders of lives once lived. Each object told a story, and Tom felt as though he was stepping into the lives of people who had been frozen in time, waiting for someone to remember them. When the authorities arrived, they moved quickly but respectfully. They treated the cabin as a crime scene, although it was clear from the start that this had happened long ago. Tom cooperated fully, explaining what he had seen and how he had found the property. Investigators examined the area carefully, taking photographs, making notes, and talking quietly among themselves. Rancher watched, a mix of relief and sorrow washing over him. He had wanted answers, and now he would have them, even if some of those answers were painful. As the investigation progressed, Tom learned more about the girl. Through old records and local archives, the authorities pieced together a picture of her life. She had been part of a nearby Apache community, a family known for their strength and connection to the land. The community had long remembered her as a gentle giant, someone who carried herself with dignity and quiet courage. Tom listened to the stories, feeling a strange kinship with a life he had never known. She had faced challenges that were unimaginable, yet she had left behind traces of resilience and grace. The town, too, began to react. Neighbors who had always avoided the cabin now came out to talk to Tom and the investigators. Some shared memories passed down from parents and grandparents, stories of a girl who had vanished without explanation decades ago. Others spoke of the cabin itself, how it had seemed haunted or cursed, how animals refused to go near it, and how even the wind sounded different around its walls. Tom listened respectfully, taking in every detail. The stories only deepened the sense of mystery surrounding the place. Throughout it all, Tom reflected on the strange twists of fate that had led him to the cabin. A property that cost only 12 cents had become a portal to a forgotten story. He had expected a bargain, maybe a small adventure, but instead he had uncovered a life frozen in time, a girl whose presence lingered like a quiet echo. It made him reconsider the way he viewed his own life, the routine of the ranch, and the quiet moments he often took for granted. The world was bigger than he had imagined, full of hidden histories and unseen connections. By the end of the day, the authorities had taken the necessary steps to ensure that the girl's story would be remembered respectfully. Breaths. Tom stayed behind for a while, walking through the cabin one last time before leaving. He ran his hand along the old wooden walls, feeling the texture of decades, the weight of untold stories, and the echoes of a life that had been lost too soon. He closed the door slowly, taking a deep breath as the sun began to set outside, casting long shadows across the ground. Driving back to his ranch, Tom felt a mix of exhaustion and quiet awe. The day had been emotionally draining, but it had also been a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of paying attention to the stories that surround us. He knew that the cabin, the girl, and the events of that morning would stay with him forever. Death. Something had shifted inside him. A deeper understanding of history, loss, and the unexpected ways the past can touch the present. That night, as he sat by the fireplace, Tom couldn't stop thinking about her. Berance. Her life, though brief and mysterious, had left a mark on the world. And in finding her, he realized that he had also discovered a part of himself, a side that cared deeply, felt intensely, and understood the responsibility of remembering those who had been forgotten. He made a silent promise to honor her memory in any way he could, to ensure that the story he had uncovered would not be lost to time. Tom went to bed that night with a sense of purpose, knowing that the journey was far from over. The cabin had given him more than he could have imagined, and the girl's presence, even in absence, had changed the way he viewed the world. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he would return, continue exploring and continue uncovering the mysteries that lay hidden in the quiet corners of the past. The morning after the discovery, the cabin felt different. A quiet that had once settled over the dusty structure was now replaced by a sense of anticipation. Tom Harris returned once again, this time with the local authorities who had begun their investigation. They were methodical, moving with care and respect, documenting every detail and preserving the scene as best as possible. Tom stayed close by, answering their questions and pointing out areas he had noticed yesterday. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. And the more he looked around, the more he realized that the cabin had been untouched for decades. A frozen time capsule hiding secrets no one had dared to uncover. As the investigators examined the cabin, Tom noticed neighbors gathering at the edge of the property. Whispers spread quickly through the small town, carrying curiosity, concern, and a hint of fear. People who had long avoided the cabin now approached cautiously, some with old memories to share, others with questions they had never dared ask. Tom listened politely, absorbing the stories, while the authorities worked to piece together the past. It became clear that the cabin had always been part of local lore, a place people spoke of in hushed tones, warning children not to go near it, sharing stories of shadows, strange noises, and an unsettled feeling that hung around the property. The investigators were able to identify the girl, piecing together her identity from a combination of old photographs, local records, and testimonies from elders in the town.
Oh! She was revealed to be a young woman of the Apache community, known for her unusual height and strong presence.
Her family had lived in the area for generations, and she had been remembered by many for her quiet kindness, her gentle humor, and her quiet determination. The town's elders spoke of her fondly, recalling moments when she helped younger children, assisted with farm work, or simply offered a listening ear. But her life had been tragically cut short, and for years her story had remained a mystery. Tom felt a strange connection to her as he listened. He had never known her, and yet, through the cabin, he had stepped into a world she had once inhabited. It was as though the walls themselves were speaking to him, revealing fragments of her life in broken whispers.
The investigators explained that her death had likely occurred decades ago, long before the cabin had been listed for sale.
Tom couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for not having known sooner. Even though he had only just discovered the cabin, it was an overwhelming reminder of how easily lives, no matter how significant, could be forgotten over time. As the day wore on, Tom walked through the cabin again, noticing details he had missed before. On a small table, he found letters and personal items carefully preserved by whoever had left them behind. There were drawings, scraps of fabric, and photographs that offered glimpses into her life. She had lived in a time when the world was quieter, when life was slower, and when family and community were everything. Tom imagined her going about her daily tasks, tending to chores, helping those around her, and perhaps even dreaming quietly in this very cabin. The sense of her presence was almost tangible, a quiet echo that filled the empty space. The town began to react more openly as news spread. People came forward with memories and stories, eager to fill in the gaps. An older woman spoke of the girl's mother, recalling how she had been kind and proud of her daughter. Even when life had been difficult, a man remembered helping her with chores when he was young, recalling her laughter and gentle strength. Tom listened to these stories, absorbing every word. Each tale painted a picture of a life full of small, meaningful moments. A life that had been lost, yet was now being remembered. The authorities also delved into the history of the cabin itself. They discovered that it had been abandoned for decades, left to the elements after the girl's family had moved away. The town's records indicated that no one had lived there since, which explained why her story had remained hidden. Her staff had in despair. Tom realized that the cabin had not only preserved the girl's memory, but had also protected it, keeping her story intact for the first person who would come along and see it. That person had been him. It was a strange feeling, knowing that a random decision to buy a cheap cabin had led him to uncover something so meaningful and historically important. Breath. As the investigation continued, Tom and the authorities worked with members of the Apache community to ensure that the girl's story was told accurately and respectfully. Breath. They discussed how best to commemorate her life, to honor her memory, and to preserve the cabin as a historical site. Tom felt a deep sense of responsibility in this process. He had stumbled upon her life by chance, but he now understood that it was his role to help the community remember her. The weight of that responsibility pressed on him, but it was a weight he was willing to carry. Throughout this process, Tom reflected on his own life. The discovery had shaken him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had always seen himself as practical, focused on his ranch and his daily routines, but the cabin had reminded him of something larger. Life was fragile, histories were easily forgotten, and the stories of ordinary people could hold extraordinary significance. He realized that paying attention, listening, and remembering were acts of courage in themselves. Through the girl's story, he had found a deeper understanding of the importance of compassion, connection, and responsibility. The townspeople began to engage more actively as well. Children were taken to the outskirts of the property to learn about the girl's life, about the Apache community, and about the lessons that could be learned from history. Elderly residents shared their memories, and Tom helped organize small gatherings to honor her. Each event was quiet, respectful, and reflective, a way to bridge the past with the present. The cabin, once abandoned and feared, had become a place of remembrance, learning, and healing. Tom also found himself thinking about the girl's family, wondering what they might feel if they knew she had been discovered after all these years. He worked with the authorities and community leaders to ensure that any remaining family members were informed and included in the process. Letters were sent, visits arranged, and conversations held with care. Tom felt a profound sense of empathy, imagining the mixture of grief, relief, and closure that her family must be experiencing. It was a reminder of the human connections that could span decades, even when separated by tragedy and time. Even as the investigation concluded, Tom remained involved. He took it upon himself to maintain the cabin, to clean the debris, and to document every detail of the history he could uncover. It became a personal mission, a way to honor her memory and to ensure that future generations could learn from the past. He spent long hours there, often alone, reflecting on the stories he had heard and the mysteries he had uncovered. Each day brought new insights, new discoveries, and a renewed sense of purpose. By the end of Part 3, the cabin had transformed from a forgotten, abandoned place into a center of history and remembrance. Tom had not only uncovered the girl's story, but had become a bridge between her past and the present. He understood that this was more than just a discovery. It was a responsibility, a gift, and a lesson in the power of memory. The town, the authorities, and the Apache community had all come together to ensure that her life would not be forgotten, and Tom felt a quiet pride in the role he had played. That night, as he returned to his ranch, Tom looked out over the plains and felt a deep sense of connection, not just to the girl, but to the land, the history, and the people who had lived and worked there before him. The discovery of the cabin had changed him. It had reminded him of the fragility of life, the importance of listening, and the extraordinary stories that could be hidden in ordinary places. And though the girl was gone, her presence lingered, a quiet but powerful reminder that every life mattered and that even the smallest actions could uncover histories that deserved to be remembered. Tom woke up early the next morning, the sunrise spilling golden light across his ranch. Even after weeks of tending to his daily work, his thoughts returned again and again to the cabin. The girl he had discovered, her story, and the history surrounding her, had become a part of him. He had always lived in a practical world, caring for cattle, mending fences, and walking the dusty plains. But the discovery of the cabin had changed something deep inside. He felt a new purpose, a quiet responsibility, and a desire to make sure the girl's life would be remembered properly. After breakfast, Tom loaded his truck with tools, cleaning supplies, and a notebook he had been keeping for weeks. Today he would return to the cabin, not as a curious buyer or casual observer, but as a caretaker of history. The town, the authorities, and the Apache community had all agreed to allow him to continue working on preserving the cabin, and he took the task seriously. It was more than just restoring an old building. It was honoring a life, and he treated it with the respect it deserved. When Tom arrived, the morning air felt crisp and quiet. Birds chirped in the trees, and the wind rustled gently through the grass. Rasp. He paused for a moment, looking at the cabin from the outside. The vines still clung to the walls, but he could see the structure more clearly now that he had spent time inside. But it no longer felt eerie or abandoned. Instead, it carried a sense of dignity, a quiet reminder of the life that had once been lived within its walls. Tom stepped onto the porch, taking slow, measured steps. Every creak of the wood under his boots reminded him of the past, and he felt a sense of reverence wash over him. First, inside, he began cleaning and organizing the space. Dust was carefully wiped away from old furniture, floorboards were swept, and small personal items were arranged respectfully. He placed photographs and letters in protective covers and began cataloging them in his notebook. Each item told a story, and Tom felt as if he were piecing together a puzzle, one that had been left unfinished for decades. He read letters carefully, noting names, dates, and details about daily life. The process was slow, but it was also deeply fulfilling, perhaps. With every action, he felt closer to the girl, to her family, and to the history that had been hidden away. As he worked, townspeople began to arrive, drawn by curiosity and a desire to honor the girl's memory. Some came quietly, observing from the doorway, while others offered stories they had learned from elders in their families. An older man spoke of helping the girl carry water when he was a child, recalling how strong and kind she had been.
A woman remembered how the girl had taught younger children to read and write, patiently guiding them with encouragement and care. Tom listened to every story, recording details in his notebook.
It was as if the cabin had become a living museum, a place where memories could be preserved and shared. Tom also coordinated with the Apache community, ensuring that their traditions and perspectives were respected. Together, They discussed ways to commemorate the girl and preserve the cabin as a place of learning and remembrance. They spoke of ceremonies, quiet gatherings, and small markers that could be placed to honor her life. Tom felt a deep sense of responsibility in these discussions. He was not just maintaining a building. He was helping ensure that a person's life, long forgotten by time, would be remembered and respected for generations to come. Throughout the day, Tom reflected on how the discovery had changed him. He had always valued hard work and practical knowledge, but now he understood the importance of empathy, history, and memory. The girl's story reminded him that life was fragile, that every person had value, and that even the quietest lives could leave a lasting impact. He realized that paying attention, listening carefully, and acting with respect were as important as any task on the ranch. The cabin had taught him lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, Tom took a break outside the cabin.
The wind carried a gentle warmth, and the plains stretched endlessly before him.
He imagined the girl walking through the fields, helping her family, and enjoying moments of quiet happiness.
He thought about how her life had been abruptly ended, leaving questions and stories untold for decades. Yet, through his discovery, those stories were finally being shared. Tom felt a quiet pride in being part of that process, even though he had only stumbled upon it by chance. In the following weeks, Tom continued his work at the cabin. He repaired the roof where it had sagged, replaced broken window panes, and cleared debris from the surrounding yard.
He also set up a small area inside to display photographs, letters, and items he had cataloged.
Visitors could come and learn about the girl's life, the history of the cabin, and the broader history of the community. Tom wanted the space to be both educational and respectful, a place where people could reflect on the past and the lessons it held. One evening, as Tom was finishing his work for the day, a member of the Apache community approached him with a small handmade cloth.
"This belonged to her," the woman said softly.
"We want it to remain here so people remember who she was." Tom accepted the cloth with reverence and carefully placed it in a protected area inside the cabin. The gesture was simple, yet deeply meaningful. It symbolized trust, respect, and the bond between the past and the present. Tom felt honored to be a part of it, understanding that his role was to protect and preserve, not to claim or control the story. The cabin slowly became a place of quiet gatherings. Families came to tell stories, children came to learn about history, and elders came to share memories. Tom was there to guide them, to explain the process of preservation, and to ensure that everything was treated with care. Each day brought new insights and reflections, and Tom felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. The cabin was no longer just a building. It was a bridge between generations, a living reminder of the importance of memory, respect, and empathy. Through his work, Tom also found himself changing. He became more patient, more reflective, and more aware of the small details in life. He spent quiet moments watching the plains, listening to the wind, and thinking about the lives that had come before his own. The discovery of the girl and the cabin had opened his eyes to the value of history and the importance of human connection. He realized that even the smallest actions, documenting a letter, preserving a photograph, or sharing a story, could make a lasting difference. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cabin, Tom sat on the porch, reflecting on everything that had happened. The cabin, once abandoned and feared, now held a sense of peace. It was a place of remembrance, learning, and quiet beauty. He thought about the girl, imagining her spirit in the gentle wind, watching over the cabin and the people who cared for it. There was a feeling of closure, but also a sense that her story would continue to inspire those who came after. As the days turned into weeks, the cabin became more than just a discovery. It became a symbol of respect, resilience, and remembrance. Tom continued his daily work on the ranch, but now he carried with him a deeper understanding of life, history, and the importance of honoring those who had come before. The story of the girl once lost to time was now preserved in the hearts and minds of the community, and Tom felt a quiet satisfaction knowing he had played a part in that. By the end of Part 4, Tom had transformed the cabin from an abandoned, eerie place into a space filled with history, learning, and respect. He had helped uncover and preserve a story that had been forgotten for decades, honoring the life of a girl who had once been part of the Apache community. The experience had changed him, deepening his empathy, his appreciation for history, and his understanding of the fragility and value of life. As he sat outside the cabin one evening, watching the sun set over the plains, Tom felt a profound sense of connection to the girl, to the community, and to the land he had always loved. The discovery of the cabin had been unexpected, but it had led to something far greater than he could have imagined. It had reminded him that every life mattered, every story deserved to be remembered, and that even ordinary people could play a role in preserving the extraordinary. With a deep breath, Tom stood and looked at the cabin one last time for the day. The walls seemed to glow softly in the fading light, holding the memories and history within. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that the girl's story would no longer be forgotten. It had been a journey of discovery, reflection, and respect, a journey that had transformed both the cabin and himself. And though the plains stretched endlessly around him, Tom knew that the cabin and the girl's memory would remain a lasting part of his life, forever.